So, that being explained, let's back up a little bit here, and I want to talk about, I said I would talk to you about gluten as well. This is what we call the gluten-induced selenium deficiency trap. So here's what I want you to understand. Now, I mentioned earlier, we said that selenium, that one of the side effects of selenium deficiency, right, we said inflammatory bowel disease. Very important if you're gluten sensitive or if you have celiac disease, because if you have celiac, you have inflammatory bowel disease, right? And so, again, selenium deficiency can cause inflammatory bowel disease, but inflammatory bowel disease can also cause selenium deficiency. And that's where we get into this trap, right? So we got gluten that damages the intestine that leads to malabsorption. In this case, you know, malabsorption of what? We're talking about selenium, right? So malabsorption of selenium and leading to selenium deficiency. Now, the selenium deficiency causes intestinal inflammation, as I just showed you, and that intestinal inflammation worsens the selenium deficiency. Now, if you're one of those kind and you've never heard of me and you haven't followed the true gluten-free diet, or you haven't read No Grain, No Pain, and you ran over to the grocery store when you found out you needed to start avoiding gluten, right? This is a big one. And you started eating all that processed, gluten-free, boxed crackers and breads and all that other nonsense garbage that's not real food. You have to understand there's not really any selenium in this stuff. So what you're getting is now you're deficient in selenium already. The inflammation is worsening the selenium deficiency. The processed foods are worsening the entire situation, but they also don't contain selenium. And so now you have this persistent selenium deficiency that increases the risk of all those health issues that we've been talking about, right? And then, as we said a moment ago, selenium deficiency causes intestinal inflammation. So if you're trying to go gluten-free to heal your intestinal inflammation, but you're doing so by eating all this junk food and you're already selenium deficient, this is what oftentimes doctors refer to when somebody goes gluten-free and they don't respond and they have celiac disease, is the name they give it. It's called refractory celiac disease, meaning you've gone gluten-free, but you just didn't respond, and we don't know why. Well, what do many doctors want to do when you have refractory celiac disease? One of the first things they're going to prescribe is a steroid to calm down the inflammation within the GI tract. Now, here's the catch-22 with that, is that steroids cause selenium deficiency. And if you don't know that, if you're on a steroid, if you've been on a steroid, you know, whether it's for joint pain, whether you take a steroid for lung asthma, for an inhaler to open up your airways, whether you're taking a steroid to manage or mitigate your joint or your muscle pain and inflammation, whether you're taking a steroid to regulate an inflammatory process, whether you've gotten an injection because of herniated disc or whatever it might be, you have to understand that steroids as the family, as a class of medications, reduce selenium. They actually induce selenium deficiency. And so again, we just said that sometimes refractory celiac disease is misdiagnosed because of the selenium deficiency, and the treatment is something that causes the same deficiency to become worse. So you can see how you can get into a really mega bind if you don't isolate and identify that particular issue. So again, you got to do it right. You got to get tested. In my opinion, first and foremost, get tested. Measure for selenium deficiency, because if you're not measuring, you're guessing. And here's the thing, there's some toxicity symptoms of selenium too. So we said earlier that selenium deficiency causes hair loss and changes in your nails and changes in your skin. Well, selenium toxicity does the same thing, okay? Selenium toxicity can cause hair loss, abnormal nail changes, weak nails. Oops. So that's fingernails, right? And so the symptoms can overlap toxicity to deficiency. So if you're just taking and pumping a bunch of this stuff and you don't know, you could end up with a problem. Now, the good news is there are no reported cases ever of a selenium-induced death in humans. Like that's just never happened. So the likelihood that a person is going to create a selenium toxicity is probably pretty low, unless you're just, chugging the whole bottle of pills a couple of times a week. That being said, let's talk about upper intake. So 400 micrograms, if you're not being monitored for deficiency, if your levels of selenium aren't being monitored, don't overshoot 400 micrograms, and probably you want to stay closer somewhere around the 200 microgram range. The general recommended daily allowance of selenium for adults, and it's different between males and females, but it's between 50 and 70 micrograms a day. So this is like if you want to not have Keyshawn disease, which is congestive heart failure as a result of selenium deficiency, then you need to get at least this much. But in some cases where people are really, really low in selenium, you've got to really dig them out of a hole. And so supplementation becomes an important part of that process of digging them out of that hole. But I just don't recommend going and just popping high doses of selenium over long periods of time without having your doc look at this and measure it. Now, there are a number of different ways that we can measure selenium in the blood. The best way is something called intracellular. So we actually look inside the cell, particularly your immune cells. We look inside what's called a lymphocyte, because the lymphocyte is where a lot of the selenium is going to function for your immune system. Remember I said earlier that selenium drives a lot of the properties of immune function. But there are other ways to do it. There's a test called glutathione peroxidase. Actually, the name is activity. So when you ask your doctor glutathione peroxidase activity, this test can help you understand. Remember that selenium regenerates glutathione. So if your glutathione peroxidase activity is low, selenium deficiency can be the cause of that. But you got to be careful with this test. And I know I'm getting a little geeky here, but vitamin B2 deficiency can also cause glutathione peroxidase activity to be low. Selenium deficiency can as well. Vitamin E deficiency can as well. So if this test comes back abnormal, you got to consider all three of these. So this test isn't independently unique for just selenium. Now, some people also will measure hair levels of selenium, but I have found that hair levels, you've got to be so far under. In essence, you've got to be so malnourished with selenium that you practically are already developing Keyshawn disease. So hair tests, in my experience, they're going to pick it up later in the game than these blood tests. So the blood test, in my opinion, much more accurate way to try to assess selenium. Now, additionally, something else you can do and again, it's not solely selenium, but white spots on the nail beds. That can be a selenium deficiency, and it can also be a zinc deficiency. It can be other minerals as well. So again, it's not accurate just for selenium. So if you've had white spots on the nail beds of your finger, know that that might be a sign of selenium deficiency as well. Could be zinc, could be other minerals. So the best way, going back again to the absolute best way fundamentally to look at it, is right here, intracellular analysis inside of your lymphocyte. So ask your doctor for that type of evaluation if you're going in and you're saying, hey, we want to get this measured, because that's where you're going to get accuracy or levels of accuracy. The other problem is with glutathione peroxidase, is talking about this. Aside from this, there are 5 different types of glutathione. There's GPX, we abbreviate it as GPX. Okay, so you got GPX 1 through 5. And so depending on which one we're referring to, it's more specific for different organs. And so again, unless your doctor's running all 5 of these, even if he is, you may not pick it up, and you may get the confusion of the other nutrients. So again, going back to intracellular, definitely the way that you want to ask it. Ask of your doc to measure your glutathione levels. So one other thing I'm going to mention before I open it up to questions is I said earlier that steroids, okay, steroids cause selenium deficiency. Now, many of you right now are under chronic stress. And when you're under chronic stress, guess what happens? Your cortisol goes up. Now, what are steroids? When doctors prescribe steroids, what are they prescribing? They're prescribing something otherwise known as, most of the time, corticosteroids. Okay, which do the same thing. So corticosteroid prescription can lower your selenium, but you overproducing cortisol because of chronic stress over many years also depletes selenium. As stress does for so many other nutrients, stress depletes your vitamin and your mineral status. Well, in as far as it relates to selenium, the mechanism is through cortisol. So the excessive cortisol production leads to a reduction over time in selenium, which then can come with all those other symptoms, side effects, and potentiating different diseases and disease manifestations. So be cautious with that. If you're under chronic stress and you're not dealing with your stress, maybe your diet's okay, but you're not dealing with your stress, and there are a lot of different ways that you can handle chronic stress. One is alleviate the chronic stress by escaping or removing yourself from the chronically stressful situation, whether that's a bad job or a bad relationship, whatever it looks like in your life. You understand that you are in power and you are in control to remove yourself from chronic stress. Now, what we don't have the power to control is, the way the world behaves, right? And right now, the world's behaving kind of in I would say, a pretty crazy way. So that creates a lot of chronic stress for a lot of you. And so a lot of you may have, over the last year, developed selenium deficiency as a result of that. So again, get it measured, get it tested, and that's your best weapon of defense, is to know and to have that knowledge so that you can apply it. And if you want to just get selenium in, maybe your diet's not rich in Brazil nuts or seafood, right? And I gave you some other options as well, but a solid multivitamin with selenium, okay? When I say multivitamin, I mean multivitamin, multimineral with selenium is generally going to have an adequate quantity. Again, depending on what you're using. If you're using something like from my production, like Ultra Nutrients or multi-nutrients, you're going to get good amounts of selenium in those multivitamins. And so then when you take that supplement and then you come in with food as well, that should give you adequate quantities. Now, every once in a while, I'll get people that are really deficient in selenium, and we really have to supplement them for a good 4 to 6, 8 months to get it corrected. But again, if you're not getting tested, this is a kind of a safe insurance plan, if you will, to make sure that your body's getting adequate selenium if you're not eating those selenium-rich foods. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.